I have been excited for Senua's Saga since it was announced back in 2019. My excitement and curiosity only grew once I sat down and played the first game, Senua's Sacrifice, a year later. The first game was a pretty self-contained affair, so I was curious to see what Ninja Theory had up their sleeve. Would Senua's Saga manage to deliver another emotionally gripping journey, or would it end up feeling like a retread of what they had already done? Let's take a look. The best way to describe the gameplay of Senua's Saga is simple but effective. You could easily divide the game into three major elements: combat, puzzles, and set pieces, along with a little bit of other traversal from area to area. The combat is much more locked off and personal in this game than it was in the first game. Rather than dealing with swarms of monsters potentially smacking you from off camera, you are now locked to one enemy at a time as if it were a duel. Mechanically, it is what you would expect: light attack, heavy attack, parry, and dodge. The time-stopping mirror from the first game also makes a return if there is a particular enemy giving you a hard time. I never found the combat to be particularly hard. I died maybe 3 or 4 times, but I feel like the game was really good at making it feel like I just barely survived each encounter. The animations for the combat do a lot to elevate it. Because it's all presented as these singularly focused battles, everything feels much more personal. Every successful dodge still feels like Senua was a hair's breadth away from being cut open. Every missed parry causes the full weight of the enemy to come down on your sword and drive Senua down to one knee. All of Senua's attack animations feel like these wild swings as if she were possessed by a demon, and all of the kill animations serve as visceral punctuation marks for these encounters. Senua's Saga expands the puzzle offerings from the first game, too. The perspective puzzles make a return. These involve finding a set of Norse runes hidden in the environment in order to unlock gates that would be barring your path. They function pretty much the same as they did in Senua's Sacrifice. The new puzzles focus more on changing up the environment. Placing an orb in a pedestal will either make a new path materialize or make an existing path disappear. There are spheres of water that function the same way, but they are activated by focusing on them. The puzzle is usually figuring out which order you need to trigger things in. Sometimes after you do one part, you'll want to go and deactivate a path that you had previously made materialize. Later on, the game will layer the different elements onto each other, where it asks you to find the runes to unlock the gate, but in order to get to the right perspective, you have to shift the environment around. I thought it was a natural and effective way to merge the two ideas and keep the last few puzzles from feeling repetitive. The set-piece moments in the game were a cool change of pace. I won't go into too much detail because they happen all during pivotal story beats, but I did find them to be a nice change up from what I was doing previously with the combat or puzzles. Senua's Saga picks up not too long after the first game. Senua has taken it upon herself to travel north and put an end to the slavers that are kidnapping and enslaving her people. Shortly after arriving, she discovers that the lands of the Northmen are being ravaged by monstrous giants, and that the situation is a bit more complex than she initially believed. I was really interested to see what Ninja Theory would do for the story of this game. What else do they believe there was to explore about Senua and her journey? I am pleased to say that Senua's Saga felt like a pretty solid next step in Senua's story. One thing that helps set this story apart from the other one is that there is a small supporting cast. Senua spends most of her time on her own in this game, but throughout her journey she ends up collaborating with other people like Fargrimr or Thorkester. Seeing her interact with people in real time adds another layer to her character, since the only interactions with people we saw in the first game were through memories. A cool illustration of Senua's growth from the first game to this one is the voices in her head. In Sacrifice, they were frantic, doubting, and quite hostile towards Senua for most of the game. In this game, the voices seem to be more encouraging. The doubts and hostility are still there because that's not the kind of thing that just goes away, but now it's a stray voice or two, rather than a whole chorus of them telling Senua that she is a miserable failure. Senua's Saga is an interesting thematic companion to the first game. The first game was pretty singularly focused on Senua and her trauma. This time the story is focused on Senua carrying that trauma with her while still being able to live. One of the prevailing themes of the game is all monsters began as people. A major part of Senua's trauma was being ostracized as a monster because of the way her psychosis made her see the world. So one of the aspects that the story explores is what sets Senua apart from the giants ravaging the Northlands and how she might empathize with them. The presentation of Senua's Saga is impeccable. Visually speaking, it looks impossibly good so often. It's probably the nicest looking game I've ever played. Something I appreciate is that despite the photorealism-esque level of fidelity, the visuals still have a certain style to them. The areas where you are reshaping the environment feel otherworldly. The way that the world reshapes during certain story beats has some rather interesting visuals as well. I already mentioned how well animated the game is when discussing the combat, but the animation is just as great when capturing Senua's expressions during the cinematics. The sound design in Senua's Saga is fantastic as well. Wear headphones when you play this game. It gives so much more clarity to being able to hear the voices in Senua's head, and it provides an extra level of detail as far as them feeling like they're occupying different spaces. Sometimes when you are close to dying, the voices sound like they're being filtered through static, which is a cool new detail. The music in the game is delightful as well. The combat encounters are all scored by these high-energy drum pieces with impressive throat singing to make it feel like all of your duels are happening inside of some kind of ritualistic fight pit. The rest of the score ranges from serene and ethereal to ominous and threatening, depending on what the situation calls for. The performances in Senua's Saga were great. Melina Juergens as Senua is still one of the most captivating performances I've ever seen. Hearing the performances from the more grounded supporting characters like Chris O'Reilly as Thorgester or Aldisa Ma Hamilton as Astridir illustrates an interesting contrast between Senua and the rest of the cast. I also found the performances for the giants to be really well done. They did a great job at illustrating the pain of the creatures when Senua confronted them. If you played and enjoyed Senua's Sacrifice, or if you are a fan of story-driven, cinematically presented games, then Senua's Saga is a must-play. The game committed to a vision, and I believe that it brought that vision to life spectacularly. The elements in the gameplay are simple, but they still work in service to the full package of the experience. If a game calls for a simpler level of gameplay, I'd rather it have that than something that doesn't suit the whole. As it is, all of the elements of the game synergize wonderfully. Combat encounters, set up by dramatic story moments, still felt intense because of the incredible way that they were presented. The impressive visuals, sound design, and performances all brought to life another emotionally captivating chapter in Senua's story.